Welcome to Prepper School Live with Robbie Wheaton and Crazy Sootch.
Crazy Sootch.
So we're going to be talking about some things today that are just really uplifting and fun.
And why are you starting off telling stories? Wow.
Really appreciate Robbie Wheaton. He's been a gunsmith for over 20 years, has Wheaton Arms, does Glock aftermarket parts that are incredible, and does all the upgrades for the Palmetto State Armory Dagger. Also, he has the Robbie Wheaton YouTube channel, which is linked down below in the description, and has a really unique perspective on guns and gun stuff. And so we really appreciate him being here. Also, Sarah Mack is over at the computer. We will be taking questions. We'll take a little break here and there, but you can start asking those questions at any time. And she puts all that together. Also, we appreciate Exotac. Exotac makes some of the best fire starters on the market, including their fire rod, which is a great ferrocerium rod, and a lot of other fire tools. And guys, fire is elemental. It's important.
That's right.
And so, and they're right down in Winder, Georgia. I've been to their place. They make the tools right there. And they give you a 20% off using Sootch 20. Is it Sootch? Man, I'm getting messed up. Anyway, there's a Sootch 20. There's a link down below in the description and the code. And we really appreciate Exotac for sponsoring us today. We're going to talk about something. I am really big on not bugging out. You're a glorified refugee. You know, you're leaving your supplies, you're leaving everything. And it is a last ditch. I don't want to do this. We're in trouble.
But sometimes there's a time and a place where bugging out is your only option.
That's right. That's right.
And yeah, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. When you're down to no options other than to bug out, what do you do?
And we're looking at 10 different reasons. And then we're going to take and give you some things to think about if you're bugging out. If you haven't already, I did a video just this past week about bugging out in your vehicle. It was funny. I was looking at some different, I just put bug out in Google, and almost every picture was somebody with a backpack going off into the wild blue yonder, you know, and
below it should have said starving.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the thing is our perception of bugging out is having our bug out bags and hitting the road, walking. And that may be your only option, but that should not be your primary. That should be your emergency. And so we're going to talk today about just some of the reasons why, you know, you may not have a choice. But one of the things I want to mention before we get started is to have some plans. And we're going to get into this in a minute, and have some forethought. And that's the reason why we want to talk about this, because leaving your home on a moment's notice is going to be tough.
Yep. And there's, like we talked about, there's opportunities and there's reasons why you may have to, from, you know, storms or whatever. There's lots of different reasons why, other than civil unrest, you know, just natural disasters that could force you out of your home.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about each one. There's a number of different ones, and some of them are just happen all the time to different people, and sometimes we don't know about it. Now, first off, number one on the list, and I've got the list down below in the description, but we're going to kind of expand on it, is if you're ordered by authorities, you know, if you're ordered to leave, and that could be a number of things.
That's right.
You know, hurricanes, wildfires.
Yep.
You know, natural disasters, that danger is imminent and you need to leave. Then there is the more man-made type situations. And this was something that happened, and we've mentioned this a few times, is that there was a chemical spill on a train, which we seem to have had a lot of those lately. And come to find out, I have a friend of mine that works for the railroad, and he said that happens all the time. We haven't heard about it as much. But we had one, it wasn't probably 10 miles from here, maybe 15 miles. And a train derailed and poured toxic chemicals all over the place. And people had moments to leave. They had to evacuate their homes. I think there were about 1,500 people that had to leave. And it was like, grab your stuff and let's go. So, you know, things can happen without the signs. But these are really more or less signs. And so the first thing is when authorities start rounding up and saying, hey, you guys need to leave. And guys, again, this is not necessarily nefarious. Just because the government comes in to tell us to leave, it can be,
Right.
It could be a lead up to putting us, in more control and having control over the population. But it also could just be for your own safety. And so the one thing about all of these things is you need to think about it and weigh it out.
Well, and in a situation like that, when it's so, no notice whatsoever, if you don't have anything together, you're jumping in your car with your pajamas on and taking off.
Right.
You're leaving literally everything behind. And that's why it's so important to have a plan, have things together in case something like that does happen. At least you've got a backpack with your essentials that you need, some spare clothes, change of clothes, different things like that. So even if you're stuck in a hotel for a few days until you can go back home, or a few weeks, or ever how long it is until whatever it is that's passed, you've got some things together, and you're not just taking off with nothing but the clothes that are on your back.
Right. So especially guys, if you live near train tracks,
Mm-hmm.
if you live near an area that has an active train going through, it's something to really consider. And over the years, we've lived in some of those kind of places.
Yep.
So first off is ordered by authorities. You may need to go. A lot of times, like with hurricanes, they give you an option.
Right.
They'll say, look, we advise you to get out. Now, if you're going to stay, that's your deal.
Taking your life into your own hands. But, the people in Fukushima a few years ago, I'm sure they didn't think that, the tidal surge was going to end up short-circuiting the nuclear reactor and causing a meltdown and forcing all of them to evacuate, for miles around.
Right. I mean, and there's just a lot of things that can cause that. Okay, number 2 is civil unrest. And, we haven't seen it quite as bad as we've seen it before on a large scale, as far as, burning buildings and things like that. And a lot of that is localized. Guys, if you're living in an urban area that is having massive riots for weeks on end, it's going to force you to kind of take measures. One of the things that we've said over the past few months is, when these riots go on, you need to know what's going on. And maybe if it's coming up, because a lot of these are announced ahead of time so the people will gather, take that note and get out of Dodge.
Yep.
Go spend some time with your family, this out of town. Go on a vacation for a weekend. Just get away. And, that's one thing when civil unrest, and, it can escalate.
It can. Yeah. Civil unrest can get out of hand really quickly. And, especially if you're in an area where your law enforcement is maybe not as proactive about stopping the civil unrest, it can really get out of hand and people can get hurt or killed.
Yeah, it's almost like they become observers in a lot of places.
Yep.
And so, and it's according to law enforcement in your area. One thing that we have in our area is when we've had some riots and some protests back when they were really happening a lot, and the state police came in and shut it down.
Yep.
I mean, they came in and boom, it was over. Those guys aren't playing. And so, it is according to law enforcement. But, one of the things too, this is a sideline, is these businesses that are just being mobbed,
ransacked.
Yeah, and they're coming in, they're stealing everything. What happens sooner or later is these businesses, they go out of business. They can't continue to stay in business if they're being, stripped of all their merchandise. And so those kind of things can lead up. It can get worse. Really happened in South Africa a couple of years ago, where they went into the food storage. They had food stored for emergencies. And these people just went in and just took it all. And they went to the malls and they stripped them clean. They just had this mass mob. And that puts your area in a very dangerous situation. And it puts you in a physical dangerous situation, especially if you have kids, and two, a lot of times in urban areas, the self-defense laws are very lax. Not lax, but they're very tight.
Very stringent.
And so, to be able to use some kind of deadly force, you can find yourself, which we've seen, being taken to jail. So civil unrest, any kind of protest, those kind of things, especially in urban areas. If you live out in the country, you're going to have a little less of that. Because the country boys don't mess around with that, for one thing. Okay, and then right on the heels of that is martial law. We talked considerably about martial law. We did a video a while back about martial law. And let me just say this, guys. Martial law, when you hear that, you think, oh, martial law, it's coming, oh, it's all the end of the world. And, that's what I think a lot of times. But martial law can be beneficial to the law-abiding citizens if it's done in a certain way. But the problem is that martial law, does restrict movement, and it really clamps down. And the other thing is you lose your civil liberties.
That's one of the biggest to me. Absolutely one of the biggest. We saw that in Louisiana when they had that huge hurricane a few years ago, and they were taking people's firearms from them, people that stayed to protect their property, protect their assets, and they had firearms. There were troops coming in, and they would strip them of their firearms and take
house to house,
and take their ability away from them to be able to protect and defend themselves.
Yeah. Now, here's the other thing. This is the other side, and this is the thing about, and we'll get into it in a minute with natural disasters. But a lot of times, if I'm living in a hurricane zone and a hurricane's coming, I don't want to leave because I don't want to leave my supplies. I don't want to leave my guns. I don't want to leave all that stuff. And so there is a pull, but there is a time where you just are going to have to do it if certain situations happen. So martial law, so loss of rights. You're going to see checkpoints starting to pop up. You'll see increased air, military, or police helicopters, planes flying over. There's a lot of signs that lead up to martial law. And again, it does restrict your movements. And so getting out of that area, obviously, if martial law is enacted, there's a big problem in your area.
There is, absolutely. And one thing that I would like to bring up with increased aircraft activity, this time of year, a lot of people are seeing a lot more military aircraft in the air. They're seeing a lot more troop movements on the ground. And honestly, guys, right now, that's nothing to worry about. The National Guard, generally, they train up during the summer, and they'll have 2 weeks of active duty when they get together and do a lot of training and stuff. So that's one of the big reasons why you're seeing a lot of troop movements, a lot more aircraft in the sky right now, is because of the National Guard doing their summer train ups,
which is good because we have threats that are foreign, and we need a good, strong military to protect us. But when things start to really ramp up, and you start noticing, maybe troops are coming in, by bus loads, and that kind of thing. That is where it kind of gets a little sketchy.
Yeah, especially when it doesn't coincide with normal troop movements.
Right. Now, sometimes cities will announce that they're having training, and they're having urban training.
That's right.
And they'll announce it ahead of time. But keeping your eye out, because those things can be a ruse. Actually, they can set up. So making sure that if martial law does, and two, try to stay in areas that you're not restricted from.
Right.
Because you don't want to be taken and detained because you're going against the rules of martial law. And again, your civil rights disappear during martial law. They're suspended. So, really getting out of an area that has martial law probably means that it's a bad area anyway. There are things happening and you probably want to get out. Okay. This is one that, it's kind of funny, but this happens a lot in South American countries and African nations a lot of times, but top leaders just disappear. It happens in China sometimes. I watched a thing where one of Xi's number one guys, it was like number 2 or number 3, and security came in during a parliament meeting and escorted him out, which, those things kind of happen. But here in the U.S., when things really start happening, and one of the things we're seeing is indictments, whether you like Trump or not, or whether you're a supporter of Biden, you're seeing a lot of things that are going on. And some of it's rightly so. Some of it's not. Some of it is for political gain. We're seeing a lot of stuff that's happening. We're seeing a lot of things that are being overlooked. And so, that's where you have to look and say, where is the control here? What are they doing? What's their move here? Why are they doing this? And what are they going to implement in place of it? And watching leaders disappear or that are being politically persecuted, you need to be mindful of that. That is not the way America, is functioned. And, we've tried to stay above board. They want you to trust them. Our confidence in the government, which is already low, but then, honestly, it's a lot of the House of Representatives and the Congress and the Senate. They've given a lot of power over to executive agencies, whether it's the IRS, the ATF, a number of the EPA, all these different agencies. And what's happening is now they're threatened. Their properties, what they're doing, they're threatened with audits. They're threatened if they don't go along with these lines. And so, it's really a kind of a scary time politically to watch. And thank goodness that there are some men that are really standing up there for our rights. But again, top leaders disappeared, political persecution, even if they're not like disappear. They're not swimming with the fishes, at least, there's some things going on politically, and you need to kind of keep an eye on that. And if things start going to and that will lead into martial law, it'll lead into a lot of things like that. Okay, we're going to look at one more. We're going to go to questions. Massive power outages. And we're not talking about,
brownouts.
Yeah, or a power outage for a week. We're talking about like extended power outages where they're having issues. That can lead to a lot of bad things. For one thing, you don't have power, but neither does anybody in your area. I know up in New York, when they had that big hurricane, when Hurricane Sandy hit, they were out of power for a long time. And and the fact is, you've always got to weigh this out. Do you leave your supplies, or do you stay there? And you cover what your assets, things you can't always carry everything out. So major power outages, you're going to have loss of cell phone use, and guys, as preppers, a lot of times, we look for those alternatives. But when it may be a permanent power outage or an extended for months, a lot of things start to go on in those areas. A lot of the civil police, law enforcement, the medical teams, EMS, things like that cease to work, and a lot of problems happen. So, okay, let's go. We got some questions. We'll go to some questions, and we do have some solutions. Or some things to think about.
Sis Clark asked, would you guys say the Glock 17 is the ultimate practical defense pistol?
The Glock is, to us, the best survival option. It is the number one prepping handgun.
Yeah, I like the 19 a little more over the 17 just because it's a little smaller and easier to conceal. But they'll both work interchangeably. They're extremely reliable pistols.
Yeah, Robbie and I both, if we had one handgun, just one, that was all we could have, it would be a Glock 19. And the main reason is because of the simplicity.
It is. They're extremely simple designs. They're extremely simple to work on. Field repairs, maintenance, service. Replacement parts are cheap, so it's easy to keep spare parts on hand. I mean, and anyone can service those pistols themselves. There's not really any kind of hand fitting or anything that has to be done to them. So it's really easy to swap parts and keep your pistol up and running.
Now, we're not saying that the Glock pistol is the best pistol ever.
No, it's definitely not the be all end all. There's other firearms, other handguns that I like a lot more than the Glock. But the Glock for what it's designed for a defensive pistol that you can bet your life on and be able to have spare parts, replacement parts, easy to service the firearm and keep it up and running. Most firearms don't stack up to that, unless you have a lot of skills and experience and understanding of how firearms work to be able to do a lot more invasive maintenance with them.
Like a Beretta 92 when you're taking out the decocker and you're replacing, and then springs are flying everywhere, or the CZ, CZ75, and it's got all this internal, springs, and you got to get it just right. And yeah, I'll tell you, it's so easy to work on the Glock. So yes, the Glock 17 is great. And of course, really any of your Glocks. I like 9mm because it's a NATO round.
Woody Rosenshine asked, I would like a communication recommendation, CB, GMRS, etc., between two or more vehicles.
To me, the ultimate is ham. The downside to ham is you need to get a license. Unless it's an emergency, they will allow you to use ham. But here's the thing about ham is very complicated. So, some people, if they went out and got a ham radio, they wouldn't really know how to use it effectively.
Yeah.
So you really need to get some training with it. GMRS, those are limited range.
Yeah, the Cobra CBs for vehicle to vehicle work really well. If you're wanting to do like a station that's actually mounted in a vehicle, even your two-way radios, just handheld two-ways, will give you 1.5 miles, 2 miles of signal. So they work really well for an option inside a vehicle as well.
We've used the two-way radios in vehicles, and they work really well unless you go down into a hill.
Right.
Go down into an area. Sometimes it's line of sight, or you get a little bit too far off. So there are some limitations, but they do work and they're good. I mean, it's good for short-range communication, but really for getting distance, because you have the repeaters, ham is the ultimate, and you can get those mounted in your vehicle. Same thing, and have a nice antenna put on. But again, it's a little more difficult. Excuse me, but yeah, CB that gives you some communication, and you need some communication.
Yep.
Toolman57 says, "Hey Sootch, are Berkey water filters still okay to buy, or should I look at another brand? I heard that they had some issues, but can't find much information on it."
Well, I've used Berkey water filters for the past 12 years every day. We use them for all of our drinking water. We use it for cooking. We just use it. We use the Berkey, and we've changed the filters out. And yes, I'm aware of the lawsuit. There's a lot of holes in the lawsuit. There's some things about it where there's some questions. And so I don't have a lot of confidence that it doesn't, because I'm going to tell you this. If you've ever used a Berkey filter system and you drink water I can't even drink tap water. It makes me actually gag.
Yeah.
I mean, because of the chlorine and all the things they put in it.
And the fluoride and everything.
And those Berkeys, man, they really do it. And two, we put red food dye, and it's one way you test it. Pour red food dye in it, and it comes out clear. You can even put Coke in it, from what I hear. Now, you don't want that'll get all sticky on your filters. But we've been doing some research on it, and it's kind of a murky thing with it. But to me, Berkey is one of the best on the market. And again, we've been using them for years. I have done a lot of testing with the Berkshire filter in a sport bottle, which is the Berkey Sport, and gone down to really nasty creeks and areas, stagnant water, and I've drank right out of the water with those things, and I've never gotten sick from it. So I'm not, and it's me personally, because I've been a big fan of Berkey for a long time. I would do some more research though, but there's just a lot of litigation, and it's just a bunch of who knows what. So I don't really have a lot of confidence in that lawsuit, but I mean, it could be.
And one of the downsides that I have seen with the Berkey right now are some of their specialty filters have been out of stock for months or even years. So if there's a certain specialty filter that you're looking for your water, you may not be able to get it for the Berkey, and that would be a reason to look at another filtration system.
Right. I mean, it's extremely popular. One thing you can do too is, and this is something we talked about actually in our prepper meeting the other night, is taking some samples, because there are places that'll test your water for you, and you can take your samples and you can test them. So that would be something to have some great knowledge about, and something that I should do, which we've been talking about.
Kane Self-Defense with Master Gary Hernandez asks, "Hello guys, off the wall question. Do you think a metal detector is a good thing to have as a part of your home survival gear?"
You can find a lot of things. I mean, yeah. Maybe I need one in here when I lose something. I've got a big magnet, but metal detector would work.
And they're just fun to use.
Yeah.
But and I'll give you a really good example of where metal detectors are great in a survival situation. If you look at the war in Ukraine right now, there's been a lot of mining of areas. And we're not talking about digging either. We're talking about planting landmines in the ground. A metal detector will pick up your landmines. So you can use that metal detector if you're concerned about an area that could have potentially been mined or have booby traps in it. A lot of times you can use that metal detector to sweep the ground to be able to identify and find any type of landmine or booby trap that is made out of metal.
I know some guys that used to go to there was this one place, it was in a national park. It's called Sliding Rock. It's up in Pisgah National Forest. And people go sliding down that rock. And the water is incredibly cold. We've been doing it for years. And people would get to the bottom. There's this huge pool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when the season's over, these guys will go down there. They're divers. And they'll take metal detectors. And they have gotten Rolex watches.
Yep.
They have found all kind of college rings, all kind of stuff. Some of it was with metal detectors. Some of it was just digging around, and have done very well. So it could be a treasure hunt that you could use for assets. So I think that there's a lot of cool purposes for it. Okay, we're going to come back to some questions in a minute. We want to go ahead because we've got some stuff also to kind of go over. Next is shortages. When you see massive shortages, now I'm not talking about your favorite orange juice or toilet paper is out of stock. But if you start to see massive shortages, and that's just not food, it can be on a lot of different levels. Tools, it can be hardware, it can be lumber. When you start seeing these kind of things, there's a guy that is actually one of my Patreon members, and he's a truck driver, and he said right now he goes, they're not moving near as much freight. Mm-hmm. He goes. Used to, he would go into an area, he'd drop off freight, he'd pick up freight. He goes, I'm going to areas with no freight to pick up, and these are industrial areas. Yep. And he said a lot of the guys are talking about it. So but when you start to see massive shortages in certain areas, it's time to think about maybe we need to leave this area, because it could be that area. In Venezuela, that was one of the things, they just didn't have any food, and they're a huge food producer. What's crazy. But that's where government intervention comes in. But and I'll tell you this, guys, one of the things that's funny, in South America or in Africa, you always see the kids that are starving to death, and it's horrible. And it is. It's horrible. We actually sponsor some kids in Ethiopia. We've done that for years. In fact, one of the little girls grew up, in fact, one time I had her picture on our refrigerator, and I was doing a video, and somebody said, "Oh, look, Sootch has a baby from a black girl." I started laughing. But the thing is it's government is what's doing it. Mm-hmm. Africa is one of the richest nations as far as natural resources on the planet. I mean, they've got all kind of natural resources, and they're being stifled. And so a buddy of mine worked for the CIA, and he said that was one of the things. He goes, they don't have a famine. Mm-hmm. He goes, they get food, and the government comes in and hauls it, or these warlords, whoever's in power. And because they want to fight these rebels. But I'm getting off task here. But shortages, definitely. And shortages could be man-made.
That's right.
I mean, it's a possibility, to starve out certain areas. We've seen that in history, not necessarily here in the U.S. Okay, this is a big one. And this is one we're kind of seeing right now, is a financial collapse. Financial collapses, it could really impact an area. It can impact our entire nation. But when you start to see banks fail, and we're seeing it. We're seeing banks fail. Start watching. But when the thing is when you see bank runs, that's when it gets ugly. And in fact, the book about, hand me that book right there. Mm-hmm. I talk about this every week, so I brought it. The Modern Survival Guide for the Coming Economic Collapse. And this is about actual events that happened in Argentina. It's written by Ferfal. You can put FERFAL in Google, and it'll come up, this book. I highly recommend having this book. It is one of my just great reference books. Talked about the actual events. And, there were a number of things that he was talking about in here where their financial system collapsed and how money started running out. And so, the thing is, though, is it happened all across the nation, but it didn't happen in other countries. And so, there may be some areas that you can move to, but watch for financial collapse. You may be evicted from your home. During the Great Depression, when nobody had money and it affected a lot of people were still evicted. They couldn't pay their bills. And a lot of times we don't think about it. We think, if something happens, then we're fine. I just want to pay my bills, but the bank's closed. Somebody bought that debt, and they'll come by and collect. Yep. And so, and you may not have a job, you may not be able to work. And so they will, you can lose your home that way. That is a sure way to be on the bug out. If somebody comes to take your home, plus they have all your, if you got to get your supplies out of there. So this is definitely a financial downfall and ruin can create a situation where you have to bug out. And then of course bank runs. In fact, I think I just made that the second one, because then cash, you're not going to be able to get the cash. It may turn to zero. And guys, again, and well, we'll talk about this in a minute when we're going to look at some solutions. But bank runs are something that you need to watch for. Epidemics. I don't even like that word. I don't even like pandemic. I don't like all that. I just don't even like it. I don't like thinking about it. But guys, it is a possibility that we could have another pandemic, epidemic. Epidemics are more localized, so that's an area that you want to probably leave. But if you have those kind of situations, nobody wants an epidemic.
No, or a pandemic.
There are a lot of shortages right now with antibiotics and some other things. So that's one of the things you may have to, or you may want to bunker in even more. It may even encourage you to bunker in. But epidemics, especially if people are moving in the area, let me tell you guys, all these people coming across the borders, we've seen cholera, we've seen smallpox, we've seen things that we haven't had any problems with in 100 years that we're starting to see again. And so a lot of times those are coming into the area, and diseases that we thought had been conquered are popping back up.
And the thing about a lot of that is we don't have an immunity to it.
Right.
The majority of us, 50 and under, have never had a polio vaccine,
right,
or have never had a lot of your vaccines, because those diseases have been eradicated in the United States for like I said, decades, or maybe even over 100 years. So we haven't had a need for vaccines for those things. But people coming into our country illegally that have these diseases can very easily start an epidemic or a pandemic within our country with these diseases that they're bringing in, because we have no vaccines, or very limited supply of vaccines to be able to treat people that are become contaminated with these different diseases.
Well, it's like smallpox during the Civil War. Smallpox killed a lot of children. In fact, more people died of disease during the Civil War than they died from gunshot wounds. Or in combat. So, epidemics, pandemics are different because it goes all across the country, but epidemics can definitely cause you in a certain area to leave. So, okay, your home has been compromised. And this is probably, it really should be the number one. Your home has been compromised. Let's just take a normal example. You have a house fire.
Yep.
You have a house fire. You've got to leave your home. And of course, everything that's in there is going to be gone, or a lot of times it will, or it'll be damaged. So house fires are one of those just normal. But one thing that you could also face is in a civil unrest kind of situation is you could have somebody show up at your house and try to take your stuff. And they have numbers to where you have to evacuate. And so having a plan and being able to execute it. Flooding is something. Wildfires, just wildfires.
That's
There's a lot of areas that have these wildfires and people's homes are just burned to the ground.
Well, one thing a lot of people don't consider when it comes to a house fire is the flooding from the water that the fire departments use to put the fire out. A lot of times the water that they use to put the fire out ends up causing more damage than the fire itself did.
Right.
So a lot of your assets that you have may have survived the house fire, but were ruined because of the flooding with the water that they used to put the fire out.
And two guys, one thing, if you have a lot of food stored up, if you have a lot of ammunition, guns, things like that, that becomes a target.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with people that are looking to take things. And especially if they know that you're a prepper, because see, raiders is what I've actually got on the list. People just coming, marauders, and they come and they're going to take stuff and they're just going to overpower you. It could just be your neighbors.
Yeah.
Your neighbors, they know you're doing stuff. They see what you're doing. And then before long, they're over there begging for stuff and then they want to take it. And so, you could have some compromised times where you have to leave your home.
Well, that's a good reason to have things stored in different locations, not just at your home. If you've got the ability to be able to store things somewhere else, even if it's a storage unit that you can keep some things in, it's always good to have a cache of things stored off-site away from your primary residence and your primary food and ammunition supplies.
Right. We have one. We call it, our survival cache. And me and a buddy of mine, we go in together, and it's in another area of town. If we get home and we can't get to home for whatever reason, we've got that with just the basic supplies that can get us through. So, or again, somebody else's home or whatever storage unit. Okay, let's go to a few more questions, and then we're going to look at some things that you need to think about for bugging out.
Stephen Churchman says, hello from Steve in Dudley, England. Due to the gun laws here in England, would you consider the use of a hunting bow as an alternative form of self-defense if the need arises?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And of course, if you've ever watched, The Walking Dead and the crossbow, yeah. I mean, definitely, you guys are hamstrung, unfortunately. And so having some means of self-defense is very important, and it's got to be an alternative. I did some improvised weapons a while back on the video. It's been a few years ago, where even a newspaper or a magazine or a newspaper rolled up really tightly still makes a good weapon, a good flashlight, pepper spray. But as far as a lethal option, a bow, I mean, it really changed the face of medieval warfare. So it's definitely something. And two, being in England and there's not a lot of guns there anyway. I mean, the criminals sometimes have them, but it gives you an advantage as well. And at least it puts you on an even playing field.
It does. That's right. And I'll tell you, a weapon that a lot of people overlook are slingshots. They're a lot smaller. They're compact. It's easy to carry. It's easy to carry ammunition for them. Slingshots are very, very effective in the hands of someone that is trained and knows how to use it.
Like David versus Goliath. There you go. That's a great point. The one thing is, though, with a slingshot is you need to practice with it. You do.
And, well, bows as well. Even with your archer equipment, you still need to practice and train with it and become proficient. But don't discount a slingshot. That's a very deadly weapon that can be used very effectively in the hands of someone that's got the skills for it.
That's a good point. But yeah, your flashlight makes a good defense tool.
Jerry Fowler asks, are nuclear power plants protected from EMP?
I'm sure the government has done a lot to harden it, but I wouldn't say it's infallible. But what would you say?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah,
I really don't. They're like everything else in this country. They're controlled by computers. They're like with anything else that's connected to the internet. They can be hackable. And then as far as EMPs go, it really just depends on how shielded all of the electronics inside the facility are. If they're shielded with enough concrete material and concrete walls, as well as being underground, then yeah, they could have a lot better chance of surviving. But if they don't have enough shielding, then they would definitely be susceptible to an EMP. And also depending on how close the reactor was to the EMP blast. If the EMP blast was very close, it could have a lot more negative effect on it versus one EMP blast that's further away. So a lot of variables there and a lot of unknowns with that. So.
Well, I know that I have a friend of mine that does surgeries, and he makes a certain part for the heart, and he does a lot of different surgeries and involved in them. And one thing that they have in a lot of the operating rooms, especially with MRI machines and things like that, is they build Faraday cages around them. And so I'm sure that the U.S. military, police, I hope, is doing that, especially something that would affect public safety like that. Yeah. And because the other side knows where these reactors are, and that's why they're so heavily guarded. But also, I'm sure that they're doing a lot because they have been hardening a lot of their stuff over the past few years because it is a threat. So I would be surprised, honestly, if they didn't have a good hardened system. But the other side of it is in a nuclear blast, and it's according to what kind of weapons being used. Sometimes it can have some different wavelengths, and the attack can be different for different type bombs. So there's so many variables, and honestly, it's all theory. Pretty much. Okay, you got one more? We'll go to one more.
Lucky's Thoughts ask best value freeze dried foods and thoughts. Any thoughts? Thank you.
For as far as value goes, what my favorites are like Mountain House and some of those. They're pretty expensive. We like My Patriot Supply, and we like that. Those guys have done really good, and seems to be a little bit lower in sodium. That's the one thing you got to watch for is the sodium content. It can be too much. A lot of it has to do with the preservatives. But, that is one thing. But My Patriot Supply has been good. If you got something that,
My Patriot Supply or Mountain House, either one, we've been doing a lot more canning instead of the freeze dried stuff, and canning different foods for long-term storage, and to go along with our garden and everything that we do. And so we really go the canning route instead of the freeze dried route with our foods, just because we can put up so much food every year from the garden.
but, a lot of people don't have that option. Yeah. I would highly recommend putting in a garden, even if it's just a tomato plant, with growing some tomatoes, but getting your hands in the dirt and start to learn how to garden, because that could definitely be something to think about. Sooner or later, that food's going to run out. I don't care how much you store up. Okay, let's go to we may get to some more questions in a minute, but we want to talk a little bit about if you're getting ready to bug out. What are some things to consider? First off is you need to go ahead and have your supplies organized. Get your food together and figure out, okay, go through a game plan. I recently, and this was with my vehicle, and I did that video about bugging out your vehicle, because you're not going to jump in. I'm not going through our woods the first thing. I'm going to get in my car. The only problem is there could be a lot of things that are going on outside, roadblocks or just deadlock traffic. So being able to live in your vehicle, what have you got prepared for that? Is your car maintained? Do you have gas? Did you keep it filled? We try to keep ours filled. We try not to go under really a quarter of a tank. Not a quarter of a tank, 3/4 of a tank, but typically it's about half a tank. Always keeping everything up and going. Yes, we pay our mechanic a lot of money to maintain our cars, but making sure the vehicle's ready, making sure that your food and everything is together. Your camping supply. Your supplies. Yep. Whether it's sleeping bags, ways to create fire. All those things, the basic survival needs is having that stuff organized, know where it is, and be able to get to it. One thing I saw that was kind of funny was this guy was doing a mock bug out, and he grabbed an old military duffel bag, and he went to the pantry, and he just started throwing stuff in there. And honestly, I was like, that's pretty cool. And he got quite a bit of food in that big old duffel bag. Oh, yeah. And he sealed it up, and he carried it, took it out to his car, put it in there, and and one thing we did a few years ago, which we've talked about doing this again, is doing a bug out rendezvous. And so what we do is have bug out night. And so I would tell everybody, because we want to make sure everybody had that night cleared, I'd say we're going to clear out like Tuesday night. And then I would say, okay, I would call them or we would text them, which you may or may not be able to do. And I'd say, let's go to this location. And then at the last minute, I would say by 8 o'clock. And so then everybody's getting their stuff together, and they're not supposed to have everything packed or anything. They're supposed to pack it and do everything they're going to do. And then they get in their vehicles, they drive, and then we go through and see what everybody's done. That is a great exercise. Here's the thing, guys. We can think about it, talk about it, and ramble on for hours. But doing that put me miles ahead. Doing my vehicle and setting it up like I would be living in my car, it put me miles ahead, and it showed me a lot of shortfalls. Yeah. I was like, whoa, I am woefully unprepared for this. And, really, honestly, the thing to have is like a big RV with that thing packed out, and have a vehicle on the back and have stuff on top. Or a big, covered trailer and have all your stuff in.
The only downside, that's a target at that point.
It's a major target. Yep. You're a major target. And that's definitely right. So, the thing is, the fact is, guys, is no one knows. And this is one of the reasons, and I think one of my kind of foundational principles is don't lock yourself into thinking this is going to happen. How many of us have ever had this is going to happen thoughts and it happened that way? No one ever,
No.
because it doesn't happen that way. So this is one thing the military does. They have a plan A. Then they have plan B, which is a contingency plan. Then they have plan C, D, and E, because they know that plan A is not going to work, but at least it gives them a starting point to go to the other, and you've got to be able to move. And I think the biggest fault is a lot of times we think, okay, I got my bug out vehicle, I got my stuff together, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing. And then when something roadblocks, you're like, oh, what are we going to do now? So just being versatile and able to move, able to change. So organizing your supplies, getting your vehicle in good shape. Do it now. You have an EMP? Yes. Plans are going to change. Let's go to plan B, or that may be plan F.
Yeah.
But, let's go to that plan. And not being like, oh, what are we going to do? It gives you some confidence. It was one thing that Southern Prepper One says that I love. And he may have gotten it from someone else, but he says, don't be prepared. Don't be scared. Be prepared. And the more prepared you are, the more confidence and the more rational, wise thinking you're going to be able to do, because you'll have a little more time to go, okay. It's just like when COVID hit. I told Shannon, I said, go get toilet paper. Now, we had toilet paper. I said, go get some toilet paper, which she did immediately, even before we knew there were going to be shortages. I don't know why. I just said, go get toilet. So she got some toilet paper. It's probably the reason the shortage, but
you had it all.
We had it all. We didn't have it all. But she got some and completed because we had kind of used some of it. And so when all this stuff started hitting, I wasn't like going, oh my gosh, oh crap.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So, it gave me some time to stand back and say, okay, what are some other areas that I need to make sure that we're good on? And it just gives you more. So that's one of the biggest things about watching these videos and learning and getting into prepping, but practice. Think about your different things. Your destination. Robbie, where are you going for bug out?
Well, here.
And then where are we going for bug after that?
Well, we'll revert to plan B or plan C from there.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But, having a destination, you're not just, again, these people that are going off, heading to the Rocky Mountains. I just hear Donner Party. Donner Party, you have got to be prepared, and you've got to have a plan, and you've got to have a destination. Your destination may be blocked. You may have to go another way. You may have a plan B for destination.
Yeah.
You may be in another state. And
that's the big thing is when you're making plans to go places, you have to have contingency plans to go other places, because your number one choice, you may not be able to go there. My number one choice I may not be able to go there because of, the nuclear power station has been compromised.
Right.
And that negates me being able to go to my number one place. So now I have to look for a number two. My number two place may be compromised. I have to look for a number three. Where's my number three place? Is it going to be compromised? Can I get there? It's always good to have multiple different locations that you can bug out to based on situations and different scenarios.
Right. It's like my in-laws live in Chattanooga.
Mm-hmm.
And, if something were to happen, that would be a natural place for us to head toward.
Yep.
But that may be just as compromised.
Right.
So you're right. Having multiple places. Here's the other side of it. And just when Robbie was thinking, in my mind, I was imagining you pull up and you go, now what?
Yeah.
If you've thought these things out, at least you can go, okay, what about this? This was our other plan. And you kind of have it sketched out. You've got your maps, which are vital. Have maps, paper maps.
It's like we have family that live on the coast, but that would be like one of my last options to bug out to, because they live near a bunch of military bases, military installations. Yeah. Those military installations, I don't want to be anywhere near them if there's martial law going on, if our country is being invaded, if we're at war with someone. I don't want to be anywhere near military installations. I want to be as far away from them as I can possibly be. So that wouldn't even be an option for me for one of my bug out locations. I'd have to look somewhere else.
Right. And it's according to the situation.
Right.
It's according. If you're having localized riots and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have a lot more options as far as, getting to different places. But if it's martial law, you're going to have a lot less options. And so thinking these things out, one of the things in this book, I'm telling you guys, and I'm promoting this book, but I'm not making any money on this book. This is I just love it. And I think everybody needs one. But one of the things that, as I said all that, I kind of lost track. But one of the things they did was they got together as groups and they pulled together. And he said that was the biggest thing. Those that bugged out actually were followed. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these groups went up and ransacked these bug out locations because there was no law enforcement. There weren't any people up there and they could do what they wanted to.
Well, there's a lot of truth to the old saying, safety in numbers.
Right.
A lot of truth to that.
There is.
Larger groups are always going to be safer than individuals.
Right. Okay. And then, of course, the dangers. There's a lot of dangers out there, and you need to be cognizant. You really can't trust anybody.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
Yeah, exactly. And they can't trust you.
That's right.
And so one of the things I think that's very important is to keep up as nice of appearance as you can when you're out and you're doing things. And that will help you with law enforcement. It'll help you with others, is to have a purpose and to be, not just hanging out and they don't know that you're trying to take their stuff.
Yep.
So, there's going to be some trust factors there. So making sure that you keep yourself as presentable as possible. Long term on the road, you may say, you know what, it's 4 hours to Chattanooga. It's about 3.5 hours. We got to go through Atlanta. So it's 4 hours because we're going to take the back road. And knowing those back roads, mm-hmm. Knowing, okay, this would be the fastest way, but this is a more beautiful way, or this is whatever. And I've got these different options. And my chances of not running into trouble are here. One thing about it, though, is that, and I have a buddy of mine that's a sheriff. Well, he was a sheriff in one of the counties that's right adjoining ours. And he told me years ago, he's putting a lot of things in place because of a lot of the civil unrest and stuff. And he said, man, as soon as something happens, we're locking the borders down. We're locking the county down. So you're thinking, I'm going to go up here in the mountains in this beautiful area. And you get up there and you're facing a roadblock with a bunch of law enforcement. And they're like, no. And you're in line with about 10,000 other people trying to get to the mountains. So having these plans thought out and think about it ahead of time. What could be the issues? And then your assets. Money, cash money, especially if you have a financial collapse. Cash money may be good for a little while, but it's not going to take long. Cash money is going to be worthless after a while, and it's according to the situation. Mm-hmm. But if you do have a financial collapse, money is going to be worthless pretty much in a short order. Your bank cards, those things may not work because you don't. And cash is important to have.
That's right.
Having a stock of cash, because when ATMs go out, you can at least use cash on the short term. But if people know that things are totally south, they're going to want your watch. They're going to want some gold and silver. They're going to want a firearm or some ammunition or having some assets with you to be able to get yourself out of situations.
Tangible assets.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And having gold in a bank somewhere in Omaha, Nebraska, where we are, is not going to help us. It's having those tangible assets. It's really funny. Whenever I bring up precious metals, there are people who get in the comments sometimes and go, well, I'm investing in heavy metals, gold, guns and brass. And you know what? You ain't going to beat me in that. I got it. But even though, and take it from somebody that has a lot of that, gold and silver have a huge place in what I do. And if you look from the beginning of time, wealth was demonstrated by people that had a lot of that, gold, silver. They also had goats and camels and sheep. So that might be another
they were able to buy with their gold and silver.
Exactly. And the other thing is too, guys, is you don't want to be going along and find yourself faced with a camp, internment camp or some kind of camp that you have to stay in. Maybe, and two, guys, some of that's going to be humanitarian. FEMA or Homeland Security, they may set up some camps, just to help people to eat. But what's the price tag with that? What have you got to give up to do that? And so here's the thing about prepping, guys, and you know it, but I just want to give you a little more encouragement. You have more options when you prep. You do. You just have more options. And so that is in itself a reason to prep. It's going to prolong your freedom. It's going to prolong you being able to make the decisions. Okay, we have a few more questions and we'll do those. I just, guys, again, probably the most serious part about this whole thing is what we talked about at the end, is being prepared for a bug out and thinking about it ahead of time.
Sis Clark asked, how much of your carry weapons ammo should you store in bug out bags?
Well, I like to have my magazines, to me, 10 magazines probably for my primary rifle as far as carrying on me. And that's probably a little more than.
No, I agree with that. 300 rounds is 300 rounds for your rifle, 300 rounds for your handgun is kind of like a standard loadout. And that's generally what I recommend.
Yeah. And then, of course, if you're in a vehicle, you can definitely store more.
Yep.
The only thing is, guys, because I'm sponsored with ammo, and I have had to go to trucks to docks and pick up ammo before. And it doesn't take long to load your car down, which will drag your gas mileage down. So, there's got to be some balance there. So maybe a lot of 22.
A lot of 22. That's a fact.
But definitely you're going to need 10 magazines to me. Yeah, Robbie and I agree on that.
Lucky 13 driver asked, hi, Don and Robbie, what are your thoughts on a lithium jump starter if you get a dead battery during bug out?
Definitely. I've got one. And it's a diehard, and it works. I've used it a number of times. I was having some trouble with my Hummer to where something was keeping it the power on inside, and it would run my battery down. And I would use it. I'd hook it up. Man, that thing would start up. You just got to make sure you keep it charged. But yes, I'm a big fan.
Yep. I agree. I agree completely. But something else to consider is owning a vehicle with a manual transmission that you can push off. So a lot of people don't consider that anymore. With a manual transmission, you can push in the clutch, push the vehicle, get the vehicle rolling, put it in second gear, pop the clutch, and start the engine. So,
and two, an older vehicle is easier to work on. And plus, it could be, if it's a certain year, and I think it was, 75? There's a certain year when they started using electronic fuel injection. Anything above that is susceptible to an EMP. Older cars are not. I mean, and you can do some research. I can't really remember the exact year. And it's something actually that we've been wanting to do because you can actually repair. We've done all kind of crazy stuff to cars when I was young. Transmissions, clutches, doing all that stuff.
Your mechanical diesel engines are all non-electric and will survive an EMP. Your older vehicles that have points, ignitions, and carburetors will survive an EMP and function properly. So, there's a lot of benefit to having an older vehicle, especially in the times that we live in today.
Right. So, there.
John G. asked, hi, Don, would you recommend a holy hand grenade for protection from killer rabbits?
Well, after seeing that in action, I would definitely choose the holy hand grenade from Antioch. I think it's definitely a weapon that could be used. And if any of you guys don't know, that's from Monty Python's Holy Grail.
Joseph Ritz asked, how do you prevent robbery while bugging out? It seems like you would be very vulnerable to being loot dropped.
Definitely. Let's face it, guys. There is only so much you can do, but total situational awareness, walking with a really large group, having a firearm that's very accessible if you need it, and training with it. And two, knowing that, you may lose people that are in your family, but you may lose everyone if you give up your supplies. So that is a tough situation. I think avoiding certain areas, being very mindful of what's going on in your surroundings. It's like somebody saying, hey, let's take a shortcut and walk through this dark alley. It's not a good idea, especially now in New York. But, taking a little bit of a longer route to avoid certain things. But to be honest with you, they can get the drop on you. But having a larger group, I think, would make it better. And less of a target. And here's the other thing. You don't want to be a target. Make yourself confident. When somebody that does that kind of stuff and they're approaching you, if you're very confident and you kind of are, pretty strong and you don't look like you're a tourist, that goes a long way where people go, I think I'll leave him alone. We'll get the next guy. So there are some options. I know Nothing Fancy did a video a while back, and it was similar to having a group, and when people would come, is to have a strong presence and be ready and very, deliberate and very, have a lot of confidence. And I think that goes a long way as well, because if I were a criminal, which I'm not, but if I were, I would probably pick the weaker.
Oh yeah,
and not the guy that's like, looks like, Hulk Hogan or something.
And one of the big things too, if you have to be violent, don't hesitate. Just get to work.
Yeah, and that's true. And it was funny. James Yeager, his book, the last book, The 7 Pillars of Gunfighting, which was excellent. One of the things that he said is if you are led to violence, be violent.
Yep.
Shock them with how much violence you're going to put against them. A lot of times people are like, they just want to do the bare minimum just to get away. No, go after them and really just take charge. And you know what? Once they make the call to be violent to you, then you've got to give more than what they were willing to give. It will shock the crap out of them. So, just make sure that and some of you guys are going, I just don't have that in me. Well, when you got your family with you, you need to develop it. So with all that being said, great guys, a lot of great questions. I hope this kind of helped. Yes, there are some times I am totally against bug out. I think it's a horrible idea. I think you're crazy for doing it. But sometimes it doesn't matter what I think, because I don't want to do it, but I'm forced. And that's the whole thing. We're forced to do it. And so with that being said, we have to make contingency plans. And the contingency plans and some planning ahead of time is going to give you a head start. So we really appreciate Robbie Wheaton for being here today, as always.
Great to be here.
Again, check out Wheaton Arms and also the Robbie Wheaton YouTube channel. And the link is down below in the description. And we just really appreciate Robbie for being here. And also Sarah Mack for keeping tabs on us and helping set up and just all of her work over there with the questions. But we really appreciate you guys, because otherwise, Robbie and I are going to sit here for a while and talk. We're going to talk anyway, but we just thought we'd bring y'all along. So be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic.